Here are Zeynep, Andrei, Youssef, and Maria and her mother. In the previous video, we found out what their costs of living are, and we know that they need to cover disability-specific goods and services in addition to items like food, shelter, etc. We have seen that persons with disabilities and their families need more resources to achieve the same standard of living as those without disabilities, and because of those disability costs, it is also more difficult for them to get and keep work or access education. Social protection can help address those costs and support inclusion of persons with disabilities. To do so, it is important to consider the diversity of costs faced by different groups of children and adults with disabilities when seeking equal basic participation. Carrying out surveys with persons with disabilities and their families is a good way to get relevant data. These data can help define the best combination of cash transfer, concessions, and services to address those costs. So, what type of schemes can help address disability extra costs? One of the most important is healthcare cost coverage. Persons with disabilities often have greater healthcare needs and face high health-related expenses. They should be considered as priority group to benefit from universal health coverage, which should include rehabilitation and assistive devices. A universal disability support allowance can provide a flexible support to cover some basic disability costs. The problem is that often disability cash transfers are only provided to persons with a disability who have been identified as unable to work. This leaves those seeking work without any support. To be effective, a disability support allowance should be granted even if a person is working, receives an old age pension, or lives in a household benefiting from a child grant or poverty assistance. However, if you are a person with disability who needs sign language interpretation or a lot of personal assistance, your basic disability allowance will not be able to cover the exceedingly high cost of this support. So, to address this issue, an additional support should be introduced. It can consist of, for instance, third-person support allowance, a caregiver allowance, especially for parents of children with disabilities, or the direct provision of personal assistance services. Another tool that many governments have put in place are concessions or discounts. For instance, free public transport or discounts on different goods and services that are regularly consumed regardless of disability, such as utilities. Although these concessions may not be directly related to costs specifically incurred because of a disability, they can compensate for those that are. All of these schemes can be placed in two categories of assistance: cash and in-kind assistance. Because disability extra costs are so varied and dependent on a person's specific situation, different instruments must be combined to ensure that the set and the diversity of disability costs are actually covered. So, let's combine.
For us, the ideal combination would be free healthcare or at least subsidized payment for Maria's habilitation session and coverage of assistive devices. A disability allowance for Maria would help to cover easy read learning material, additional transport costs and other things. Also, because we lost my income when I had to leave work to assist Maria, the caregiver's allowance would help with that.
Because my pension is very low, I would need a disability allowance to help cover my basic monthly expenses. Some discounts would go a long way for me as well. Because I cannot use the buses, I could benefit from a discount on taxis when I go to see the doctor or my family. Also, I discount on my electricity bill because I am so often at home and spend a lot on it. I need free healthcare coverage as I have to see the doctor quite often, and it would really help me if it would also cover wheelchair maintenance. On top of that, I need a few hours of personal assistance every day because my family cannot help me much, and I do not want them to give up work for me.
For me, the provision of a sign language interpreter would be very helpful, as that is a huge expense which I mostly cannot afford, and not having one creates a lot of problems. Also, The disability allowance would help as a top-up for my salary so I can cover my monthly expenses like mobile data, which I have to use a lot.
Because I cannot find work, I need a disability allowance to help with my food and rent, as well as disability-specific costs. Also, concessions for transportation, a mobile phone, etc. would be great. Because I need a person to accompany me when I go out, the provision of a support person for that, or a third-person allowance, would be very useful.
Critical components of inclusive social protection systems are meaningful concessions, development of support services, and a universal disability allowance compatible with work and other income security benefits. These are present in most high-income countries. However, a few low and middle-income countries such as Thailand, Georgia, Nepal, Mauritius, among others, have been working on developing them. This shows that in most contexts it is possible. Governments and organizations of persons with disabilities have to work together to decide what would be the best combination of schemes for their countries to effectively support persons with disabilities to escape poverty and to get a chance for equal social and economic participation.